Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 1 of the 2A Collective podcast. We have a very special guest with us today. It is my pleasure to introduce Heather Allen, a firearms and concealed carry instructor out of North Carolina. She's also a published author of now 2 books, and I'm sure we can expect to see some more. Heather's also the Empowered 2A North Carolina ambassador and is always striving to set the bar higher and achieve even more great things on behalf of the 2A community. Heather, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks so much for that great introduction. Thanks so much for having me number 1. It's such an honor. Really appreciate that.
Of course. Well, let's get right into it. You mentioned you were just at the National Women's Range Day. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's the 2nd annual National Women's Range Day that Empowered 2As, kind of like a little subdivision of Gun Owners of America. And the first one was in Dallas, Texas. It was amazing. And then a few weeks ago, it was in Las Vegas, Nevada. So a whole bunch of, probably like 200 women for both times get to get out there, shoot machine guns for very cheap. It's about $25, so I don't think you could beat that anywhere. I kind of joke with ladies, like, I've done it where I've paid to shoot machine guns, and then I've done it at the Empowered 2A. Let me tell you, you're going to save a lot of money. It's like the most fun, expensive 20 seconds of your life. All right, okay, now it's over. But yeah, we had lots of great women come and do the basic handgun, introduction. We had women anywhere from, just starting to get into shooting and people very, very advanced. So all were welcome, and it was a really great time.
Well, that's awesome. That's what it's all about, really. That's fantastic. So these 2 books that you've self-published, I mean, what an accomplishment. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Just happen to have them right here. Okay, so first book is called 50 States in My Sights, and I just chronicle shooting a firearm in all 50 states. I talk about where I shot, what I shot, who I shot with, but then most importantly, I highlight each and every state's gun laws, because it is so important to know every state's gun laws if you are traveling with your firearm. And then I took a little trip to Greece. Highly recommend. Beautiful, beautiful country. Of course, I did some research. Can I shoot a gun there? No, it's very, very strict. Gotta have the permits. And our tour guide mentioned, I think it was a spot in Athens. He said, this is where a journalist was shot and assassinated. And I was very snarky. I was like, oh, how did the person get the gun? I thought guns were illegal here. And he said, well, it was a time of war. Everyone had guns. And I just kind of stopped in my tracks. I was like, how did a country go from everyone having guns to now virtually no one having guns? Came home from that trip. I was looking at books, seeing if there was books about other countries losing their guns. There was not. So I saw an opportunity and I wrote Losing Their Guns. And I learned a lot about history. If you enjoy history, you'll really like this book.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I touching on the first book, I learned quite a bit about local laws when it comes to states and the difference. Like, I believe it was Delaware you mentioned, when you get it concealed, you have to take out an ad in your local newspaper to let all of your neighbors and friends and family know. I mean, I was shocked.
Yeah, you pay for that for 10 days in your local newspaper with your home address in it.
Yeah, safety first, huh? Especially if you have kids, you have to plaster your home address everywhere.
Yeah, I think it's just a huge deterrent. My theory is, like, everyone has a lot of money in Delaware, so if it's going to raise the cost, no problem, I'll pay for whatever it is. But if you're going to shame people and make them put their home address, that's one way of minimizing the number of concealed carry holders.
That is something. What was your favorite state to shoot in?
There were so many good ones. I did really enjoy Kentucky because my really good friend, we went to the Kentucky Derby, and we're like, we spent way too much money to wear these big hats once. So we took them to the range, and a bunch of old men kind of staring at us like, who are these girls? And then we shot really, really well. So everyone was kind of like, oh, you want to shoot my gun? You want to shoot my gun? That was just a really fun range day. And that range was where it's called Knob Creek Gun Range in Kentucky. And I think it was like CBS or ABC, one of the news stations, tried to say that they filmed a bunch of explosions happening, and they said, oh, this is the war in Syria. But it was not the war in Syria. It was Knob Creek Gun Range's annual, I think they had like their machine gun day. It's like, now you wonder why people
too funny.
track the news these days. But yeah.
Yeah, probably cheaper to steal some coverage out of Kentucky than it is to actually cover what's going on out there. Shoot, that is crazy. Yeah, and you mentioned Massachusetts and Martha's Vineyard. That sounds absolutely gorgeous. I actually grew up right outside of Boston,
Okay.
and that was kind of the animosity and the hatred towards firearms is stubbornly what pushed me into this. You know, my dad wanted to get a shotgun and become a member at his local skeet shooting venue, and the steps he had to take. I mean, he had to be sponsored by a former sheriff or law enforcement officer who would do kind of like a personality reference almost, you know, like this individual can be trusted with a firearm. And towards the end of it, he just got so fed up. He was like, this is not even worth it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the reason they do it, is try to get more people to just give up. But yeah, it was Massachusetts and New Jersey. They were very difficult to shoot in because they didn't have the firearms owner ID card. So luckily, I called someone from the Martha's Vineyard Gun Club. It was probably the most beautiful range I've ever been to. And he just kind of took out his shield, let me shoot a few rounds. Like, thanks, high five. Really appreciate that. It would have been really hard. And then in New Jersey, they said because I didn't have the firearms owner ID card, I couldn't get my own lane. And so I was kind of pleading with the cashier, like, I drove all this way from North Carolina. Here, this is my goal. And then this really nice couple heard, like, you can come in our lane. They're really nice. So thanks to them, I got to check off New Jersey.
Wow. Yeah, that is something, I tell you. What really kind of got you motivated into beginning this writing career and your interest in authoring these books?
When I started, I did not have the idea to write a book. It was just kind of, I think I was halfway done in North Dakota, kind of scrolling through Instagram. And a friend of mine, he held up his book. It's called Hard to Kill. And he's like this jujitsu guy. He's like, yeah, I wrote a book. I was like, if Josh could write a book, I'm sure I could do it too. So he put me in touch with his publicist. And it was just a very easy process. Even if you are good at some technical things or formatting, you could probably publish a book for free. If you're not very tech savvy, then it's really not too expensive. I think anyone can write a book these days, which is really cool because something for your family, your great great grandkids one day, they're going to have this book that you wrote. So I thought that was really cool.
Of course, yeah, and there's a level of accomplishment to it. I mean, you posted a week or two ago that both books had number one and number two spots. I
So
mean,
it
that's
was,
incredible.
yeah. So Losing Their Guns, it hit number one for paperback and number two for ebook, which I was like floored. I was not expecting that at all. I had to look at it a couple times, like, oh my god, one and two. It's so awesome. So appreciate it, everybody.
Yeah, of course. And they really are a fun read. I will say that, you know, objectively, I enjoyed all of the information and they were definitely a fun read.
Good. About gun laws, because gun laws can be pretty dry. So I appreciate you saying it's a fun read when I'm talking about gun laws.
Well, no, and I mean that genuinely. I think one of the markets that, you know, I don't think anybody on the other side of the aisle would admit to this, but I think you're probably going to tap into a market of folks who are interested and curious and realizing that we've, in my opinion, reached this precipice in society, you know, in America where we're either going to crash and burn or the strong really are going to have to stand up and say something and do something. And I know you're quite active in the local community and the local government as well. North Carolina is seeking to become the 30th state constitutional carry, if I remember that correctly.
Yeah, we got South Carolina was the 29th. So just naturally, we should have our sister state, North Carolina. So it passed the Senate. It got a simple majority in the House. And then it goes to our governor's desk, and he's got 10 days to either sign it into law. We do have a Democrat governor. Don't think he will sign it. If he doesn't sign it, then it goes into law. And then on December 1st, constitutional carry would pass in North Carolina. If he vetoes it, it goes back to the Senate, back to the House. And at that point, we would need one Democrat to either be on board or possibly be sick that day. And if that happens, then it will go into law December 1st of this year. So we'll see.
Yeah, yeah, one could hope. I mean, I know on May 5th, 2021, Utah was the 18th state to become constitutional carry. So we're trying to make some moves in the right direction, I believe.
Do you know the first state to go constitutional carry?
I don't.
It was actually Vermont in 1777. They wrote it into their state constitution. And the thing with Vermont is that they're the only state with zero tangible permits. So a lot of states will accept everyone's permit but Vermont's, because if they get pulled over, it's like, well, here's my driver's license. I'm from Vermont. I have this birthright.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of cool about Vermont.
I mean, that makes for a very simple argument, you know. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, and then you have the NRA show coming up, yes?
Yeah, I'm excited. I've actually never been to the NRA show. This will be my first one in Atlanta. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, and you have a few partnerships going with that as well, correct?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So when I was doing my first raffle, I reached out to Mitchell Defense and they donated this awesome rifle. And a really good friend of mine won it, so that's kind of cool. I get to shoot it at the range. Ross Martin was another big partnership. That was really cool. So we got Riker USA, and then I really love. Let's see if I do have it right here. Crate Tactical, really good knives. Love this knife, so I'm gonna raffle off one of those. And there's this really cool new tea company called Sasquatch Tea, and they're very Second Amendment friendly. I think guys about a week ago, and they're like, yeah, there's no like kind of tactical or at least like pro America, pro Second Amendment tea companies. So they donated as well.
Oh, that's so funny. I'm actually a huge fan of tea, so I'll have to look them up.
Me too. Do you have a favorite flavor of tea?
I've been really digging the Bengal spice.
Ooh,
It's a Celestial Seasonings
yeah,
tea. Yeah,
that's a good.
that's always a good one. I like that little kick of cinnamon and spice in it, you know. I am a huge fan of coffee, really anything with caffeine, but there's just something about tea that
Sure.
just kind of does it for me for sure. But yeah, we've mentioned a few things about North Carolina, but you're originally from California, correct? So what, especially in that state, what got you so involved in the 2A community?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Southern California. I think I had a pretty typical gun upbringing, which was like non-existent. My dad would say, there's a gun in the closet, don't touch it. There's a gun under the bed, don't touch it. And I was like, okay. I wasn't really too interested anyways. Married my husband. He was military and law enforcement, LA County Sheriff's Department for 15 years. And when he was in the Navy Reserves, he'd fly out to Virginia for a few weeks. And I remember having like our daughter was 18 months old. I was like, oh, I should probably learn how to use one of these, and did a little bit more training. But it wasn't until I started working for the California Rifle Pistol Association is when I really learned about not only just Second Amendment rights, but your constitutional rights in general, especially living in California, just how quickly those can disappear and how extremely hard it is to either, file lawsuits, try to get your rights back, or try to vote for your rights back. And there's things that we were dealing with 10 years ago, they're still being litigated today.
Wow, wow. Yeah. And there's a lot of rumors, that you hear and some crazy stories, but is it accurate to say that if your home is being burglarized and potentially your life threatened, you're supposed to leave? You're supposed to just walk away.
Yeah, I want to say technically in California, it is a castle doctrine, but there was a representative in Santa Monica trying to, reverse the castle doctrine. So exactly what you just said, if someone tries to kill you in your own home, you shoot and they die. Now you go to jail. But maybe in your home, like you had to retreat to the furthest part of your home. They did work with some attorneys, and there was one guy, I think he shot someone who came into his house. The guy survived, but the cop was like, well, why don't you go hide in your garage? He's like, this is my house, but yeah, it's just
Yeah,
a little
that's
different out there.
Yeah, that's just astounding to me. It really is. For those who don't know, could you just explain a little bit about what the castle doctrine is?
Sure, it's like a stand your ground. If you're in your home, you do not have a duty to retreat. There are some states where you do have a duty to retreat outside of your home, but typically for a lot of states, it's like you have a legal right to be where you are. You don't have a duty to retreat. Someone, at least in North Carolina, if someone's even attempting to break in, they're like halfway through your window, you feel like you have the right to feel like your life's in danger and use lethal force at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is the relinquishment of control of the government. And that's such a broad comment. But to give people back their power and say, no, like this is my reality. This is the situation that I was in. And, I believe and can argue successfully that I took appropriate steps.
Yeah, and it brings me to the man in Los Angeles where people are coming up to him with guns. I think his wife and baby were inside, and within his doorway, he turned and he fired back. And I want to say his concealed carry permit was revoked, which is insane.
Yeah, yeah, we certainly have a lot of work to do, But where do you see this evolution of government? I know I mentioned we're kind of on this precipice, of our current administration undoing some of the damage from the past
Mhm.
administration. And, what are your goals and your focus in kind of helping that fight?
I will say being a firearms instructor in Los Angeles in 2020 was very eye opening. We had a lot of people coming like, well, I want to buy a gun today. Well, sorry, but there's a really good chance you voted that you have to wait 10 days and you cannot buy two. You have to wait like 40 days to get a second one. So a lot of people, and they would say like, well, can I just borrow one within the 10 days? No, that's a felony. So I do think a lot of minds were open. Maybe I should really read this bill that maybe it's going to say like safety, like we want our safe neighborhoods. Oh, that sounds good. But then you read it and it's like you're voting to take your rights away. So I do know people personally who have changed their minds on firearms after 2020. So my goal is just to remind people, remember that feeling when you didn't have anything to use to protect yourself. And maybe if you did buy a gun, like you got to go train with that now, even if it's just once a month. If you can't make it to the range, just take it out, kind of get reacquainted with it, so you are comfortable and feel pretty confident with that firearm.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned the government and advocacy, and we have an event out here, one of the largest live fire events. It's awesome, called Shootah. And what I realized last year with the event is Phil Lyman, who was running for governor, was in attendance, and openly, picked a lane, shot a few rounds, and was there for the people, talking to the people, and not just hiding behind a desk. And I certainly hope we see a lot more of that for sure.
Yeah, I think we just had JD Vance firing up some some rounds downrange. That was good to see.
Yeah, yeah. I certainly hope silencer and suppressor conversation is looked at again. I think when they first kind of included that in a ban, I made the comment previously that I just don't think we had any advocates of silencers, suppressors, of that science. We didn't have enough of us sitting at the table, and
Mhm.
I don't know if that is, you kind of mentioned maybe a lack of interest, in government, and like, yeah, I'm just going to vote for this. And it seems right. I saw it on the TV, and it told me to vote no. So that's what I'm doing, like, but,
A great piece of advice I got from the director of the California Rifle Pistol Association, Rick Travis. He actually wrote both of the forewords in my books, but he said you really have to research who is running for your local dog catcher position, because there's a really good chance that person's not staying at local dog catcher. They're going to go to like maybe the school board, commissioner, maybe senate. So you really do want to see if your values align with just like a position you don't really think about, but in the future you're most likely going to be working with this person, or they're going to have some type of control in your community.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I will say I was pretty blind to it all, and maybe even openly passive about involving myself in local government and doing the research. And I realized a switch when my daughter was born. There was this introduction into a different life, like my life no longer was what do I want to do? How do I want to do it? It was, what does she need? What's gonna happen in her future? And, I've certainly been trying to be more attentive to what's going on. But Would you mentioned your involvement in California, but what was there a moment or an event that really kind of changed your mind about things, or kind of created this motivation for you?
The big one, I would say, I believe it was 2017, was when Californians voted to tax themselves more at the gas station. It's like, I wasn't big on social media, but I did a deep dive into this bill and I was just blasting on everyone. This is a bad bill. They can raise the tax every year without a vote. And when it passed, I was like, what is the next thing they're going to vote to do to themselves? And that was really, it was that time. And then when a crazy homeless person just smacked his hands on my car and like I had a gun, on me, and I was like, please don't let me use this because the soccer mom's gonna call the cops on me. And then I just remember thinking, like, is it gonna get better? And that's really when we kind of had the discussion of moving out of California. And I give so much credit. I have so much respect for the ones who stay and fight. But there were a few things, especially the voting to impose more taxes on themselves, that just like blew my mind.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually quite fond of California, more specifically Southern California. I proposed to my wife in San Diego.
Aw.
Yeah, we used to go quite a bit, but it was when I got my latest Uber bill that I was just floored. I mean, there's a tax on everything. I'm paying the tax on their gas. I'm
Yeah.
paying, if I don't remember the exact mnemonic they used, but like almost like a or a chauffeur tax, and it was a $9 ride cost me $27.
Wow.
It was crazy. It was something for sure. So yeah. So with some of these events coming up, other than the NRA show, what are a few shows you're looking forward to attending this year?
We got GunCon in Ohio. That's the end of June. And then I'm going to try to make it to Goals in Knoxville, Tennessee in August. And then Cakes Concealed. I got to meet the owner at the Empower 2A event. She's going to have a little something just for ladies in Florida. And that's going to be in November. So I'm really looking forward to all those things.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I actually follow Cakes Concealed on Instagram. I really appreciate their content for sure.
Mhm. And have you made it to SHOT Show? Yeah. Is that in your sights soon? SHOT Show?
Yes, I sure hope so. I'm gonna this year I'm gonna be. I was talking to a friend and I said this is gonna be my yes year.
Hmm.
No matter the cost, no matter what I need to do, I'm gonna be in attendance at as many events as possible for sure
That's,
this year.
there's so many
So.
relationships you can make.
Well, yeah, and that really was my hope behind the podcast, was to give folks a voice, but also build that networking. If you happen to share some content that somebody sees and that builds up a connection, if I'm able to post something or content, or a little post from someone who may not be well known. I mean, you're from North Carolina, I'm from Utah.
Mhm.
Connecting the coasts, so to speak. And I think that's the connection, and the networking is really what will strengthen this community and make a united voice behind purpose and behind the goals. You mentioned we were talking about goals last year, actually, so that is on my list for this year. So I will certainly be looking into that a little bit more.
I will be taking a class in Orange County in California in August. So I'm hoping to make both, but I'm really excited about coming back to California and teaching some classes.
Yeah, yeah. And so one of the things that I was drawn to, especially with you and living this purposeful mission that you're on, is the correlation between women's strength, women's rights, and Second Amendment rights. Has that also kind of been a big motivator for you? And if so, how so?
Yes, I mean, mostly in Los Angeles, I taught a lot of beautiful Black women, because I'm sure you know that Black women, they're like the biggest growing demographic of new gun owners in America year after year. But I did notice a lot of them were like, had something happen to them and then they came and took the class. Like one was just accosted on a Wednesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, like on the sidewalk with their kid. So unfortunately, in Los Angeles, the approval rate to get a concealed carry permit was some crazy absurd number, like 0.002% success rate. So I'm like, unfortunately, they probably wouldn't get a concealed carry permit, but at least they were comfortable and they could protect themselves in their home as much as possible, like we were just talking about. So yeah, we were at a disadvantage. I met women who were like 5 foot, 100 pounds, soaking wet. Like they need that tool to be the best equalizer for them. So I was happy that I could help them feel more comfortable and feel more safe.
Yeah, yeah. And in your posts, I don't see one frowning face. So
Yeah.
clearly you're making it fun and exciting and I know for me there's a different feeling when you're out training. You're out trying to better yourself and take advantage of what you're given.
Yeah. It doesn't always start with them smiling, but I think it has always ended with them smiling. So
That's what counts. That's what counts. Yeah. So if there was one thing that you could accomplish this year in the community or even local government, what do you have your eyes set on? What are some goals?
really a big one. I've reached out to a few people. I'm trying to testify. I've never testified, so that's a goal. Just even saying I teach concealed carry, but this is a right that we all have. And I did notice in Florida, they have constitutional carry, but they actually turn out the most concealed carry permits. So if North Carolina does go constitutional carry, I really want to spread the word and say, hey guys, North Carolinians, ignorance is not a defense. You need to know these laws. Even though we are constitutional carry, you have the right, but you need to know the laws before you take your gun outside your home, car, or workplace, and so you don't get in trouble.
Yeah, and I do think there's a lot of value that comes from those classes. And I know when I took my concealed, so Utah was the 18th state to become a constitutional carry, and I still have my concealed permit. You got to cross every T, dot every I. And in my mind, that was kind of an extra level of protection. And we were lucky enough to, at the end of the class, be visited by a USCCA rep who went through quite a bit of information, including the castle doctrine that you spoke of and some of that. And I just think it's so important to provide that knowledge. And, I certainly hope that the fear mongering and the spread of misinformation lessens. I won't say it'll ever come to a halt. People are going to say what most benefits their argument, I think. But I certainly hope for some strides in that realm.
Did your USCCA representative talk about how you cannot bait people to come into your home? Because there was an incident in Fayetteville, North Carolina. There's like a slew of garage robberies. So an older gentleman took upon himself to open up his garage like late at night, trying to light on high-end purses on the table. And this kid came in, grabbed a purse, turned around, and the homeowner shot the kid, and that guy's in jail. Like you cannot like bait people to come in. So a lot of people are like, I would never do that. I know. I just have to tell you, you can't do that.
Yeah. No, he hit on quite a few important topics, including the legal trouble one could see themselves in if you leave a child in the back seat of your vehicle and an individual happens to steal your vehicle. One, you never want to fire, a gun in the direction of your own kin. So you got to be very careful. But there is a fine line between what rights are and are not protected in Utah when it comes to kind of standing your ground and protecting yourself.
I'll never forget one attorney in California said, God forbid, if you ever have to use your firearm, you call the police. The first thing out of your mouth should be, I've done nothing wrong. And that's always sat with me. I'm like, oh, okay. Because it goes into your mental, frame of mind at that time. Looks into the tape. Are you sure you did the right thing? Like, you hear what I said? I said, I've done nothing wrong. Hopefully we never have to say that, but
Yeah. But I like that. I like that, and it, kind of to touch on again, how I grew up, it was this kind of taboo subject of firearms. And I was talking to my mom, who is not the biggest believer in what I'm doing, and I've found that to be quite an interesting dialogue to have. And one of her kind of arguments or comments was, and I didn't realize this until recently, but she was involved in, as a victim, not the perpetrator, a bank robbery
Oh.
where they all entered the building with ski masks and high powered rifles. And her argument was, well, if we listen, if we just lay down and shut up, then there was a greater chance of us coming out unscathed. And sure, I can totally hear that argument, but my argument was this: if I'm at my house, let's say, or a gas station or anywhere, and an individual who may or may not be suffering from some sort of mental health crisis or unstable and very hard to read, it martyrism then to be shot and not be carrying a firearm. Like,
Mhm.
I don't fully understand the other side's argument of you don't need a firearm. Well, I
Hmm.
mean, what are your thoughts?
I know. I think about a 9 month pregnant woman in Florida. Two men came in armed. I want to say they shot her husband, but he survived. And she's 9 months pregnant. And she used her AR, and I believe she shot and killed one of the people who broke into her home. So you're gonna tell that woman you don't need a firearm, but she's 9 months pregnant. What is she gonna do? So that's one instance that really jumps out at me. And then it's like, would you rather have it? And I'm in the mind frame that like I would rather have it and not need it than not have it and needed it sometimes. So, but in those
Yeah,
instances,
yeah.
need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And engaging in the education behind it, range days, training, classes, I think is exceptionally important as well. I don't hear anybody making the argument we should be able to do whatever, whenever, without some sort of reason or education or purpose behind it. There's a very clear argument, that we're out here protecting what we hold dear, including our lives and the livelihood of our dependents. And the majority of us out here are, you know, hardworking, responsible, gun owners. And I think that is the misinformation and the skewed narrative that really gets me is, well, you can't just group everybody into one big category and say that nobody can have, a lot of these crimes are committed with guns, that were not purchased, effectively or appropriately or legally. And, it's that issue, I believe, will never go away.
And sometimes the people screaming it are so hypocritical, like Alyssa Milano going to a Moms Demand Action meeting talking about how no one needs guns. Meanwhile, she has her armed bodyguards, and the guys from the NRA are like, "Oh, are you kidding me?" She's like, "Oh, no, I'm not against guns." Like, you're literally here saying that there shouldn't be guns while you have armed protection. Like, what does that say? There was one time I
Yeah.
was at a women's little, it was a women's conference type of thing, and we had our booths out. I was the only one with teaching handgun lessons, and I had not one but two women tell me that they don't need guns because they don't put out that energy. And with the second girl, I was like, two? Really? You're gonna tell me like you don't put out that energy, so that's why you don't need a gun? But the second one, I was like, do you wear a seatbelt? You don't put out that energy, but you're gonna wear a seatbelt like just in case someone else is a bad driver. But those were interesting conversations at the least.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. Well, I'll definitely have to make my way out to North Carolina and
It's
visit
beautiful.
the range and see what it's all about out there. I've been to North Carolina once, back in 2012, 2000, maybe closer to 2014, actually. But I
Where'd
had
you
just
go?
purchased a car
Oh, fun.
in Massachusetts.
Oh, nice.
And I was so excited about it. I said, I'm just going to drive. So I was going to go to like Rhode Island and stuff. I went from Massachusetts to the Outer Banks.
Okay, so What did you think about the Outer Banks?
I loved it. It was a vibe, and for those watching who are aware of the Netflix show, it was pre OBX. It did not have that narrative attached to it. Come to find out, most of that filming happens in South Carolina anyway. Um, but yeah, no, it was absolutely gorgeous. I ended up in Nag's Head, and I had never been to North Carolina before.
Well,
That's just kind of.
September 6th, we're going to have a big Women's Range Day in Outer Banks. So thank you for reminding me.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, it
Lots of
is. It
parks
is.
too.
Yeah, it is a beautiful spot. You know,
Now, did you go
I
straight from Boston area to Utah?
yeah, yep, yep. Roughly around 2000. So it's
Wow.
been about 15 years I've been here. Yeah, so I've kind of lived two lives almost. I had that Boston city life, and I find myself moving further and further away from anything city.
Yeah, I hear ya. As long as I got a
But
beach, I'm happy. But the mountains in Utah
yeah,
are beautiful.
that is the one thing I miss is the beach, and I think that's probably why we ended up in California so much.
Hmm.
It's just that that smell, that the seaside vibe. I certainly miss it.
Yeah.
But
I've been on a roll with my cold plunges every morning. I go take a dip in the ocean. It is warming up, but if you ever done cold plunges, it's like taking 4 espresso shots. Like you'll be so dialed in all day.
yeah, that is next level. I have not done that. We have the opportunities in some of these mountain reservoirs, but
Mhm.
as I'm sitting here in my office with the space heater going when it's 65 degrees outside, like I'm for sure gonna end up retiring in Florida. I foresee that as my future. But
Or Palm Springs, maybe.
hey, there you go. Yeah. Well, if there's one thing you kind of would want to leave our viewers and our listeners with, what would that be?
Well, I am doing a fun raffle. So if you take a look at losing their guns and just shoot me a picture, hey, I got it. I've got the fun crate tactical knife and a lot of things from Mitchell Defense, Riker USA. So go ahead and get in that raffle.
So if I buy a second copy, do I get a second entry, or
Sure, sure.
I
One
mean, I'll,
copy.
I'll buy three or four.
We go. Yeah, and then
Yeah.
I'll do the little raffle at the end of the NRA show. So that'll be a good time.
Oh, that's awesome. I look forward to it, and I know your followers are certainly looking forward to it. And I appreciate all the content, and keep up the great work. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And your show's going to go very far. I know it. And I can't wait to meet you in person.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.